The desert wind of Zaken 5 carried dust that shimmered like copper in the dying light. Beneath the twin suns, a row of cages stood half buried in sand. Inside one of them crouched a girl, small, thin, and quiet. Her name was Zex, though the traders called her Beast. Her pale blue skin was streaked with dirt, and her long hair had lost its color under the harsh suns. Chains bound her wrists, and the metal collar around her neck blinked with a red light that buzzed. Every few seconds, Zex did not remember how long she had been there. Days had melted into each other. Her tribe had been taken during the Zarkonian raids. Those who survived were sold like animals to the mines or the markets. The last thing she remembered clearly was her mother's voice, whispering, "Stay silent, little one." The stars still listen. The traders laughed as they threw food into the sand. "Eat, little beast," one shouted. The others joined in, clapping their hands and whistling. Zex lowered her eyes and crawled forward. Hunger was stronger than pride. She picked the dry crumbs with trembling fingers, tasting the grit of sand with every bite. The traders roared with laughter. But that day, someone new arrived at the outpost, a human convoy from the Terran Confederacy. Their mission was supposed to be simple: repair the old communication tower and move on. Among them was Sergeant Sarah Chun, an engineer who hated the heat but never ignored what was wrong. She was young, in her late 20s, with sharp eyes and a quiet voice that others somehow listened to Dot as the Terran crew set up their tents. Sarah's gaze drifted to the cages beyond the dune. "What are those?" she asked one of the traders. "Local animals," he replied carelessly, wiping sweat from his face. "We sell them to the mining guild for labor. Strong backs, not much brain." Sarah frowned. She saw movement in one of the cages, a thin figure in a torn robe, looking back at her with wide, glassy eyes. Not an animal. A girl. "Animals don't wear collars," Sarah said softly. The trader shrugged. "Different worlds, different laws," he muttered, and walked away. That night, the desert turned cold. The human camp glowed with soft blue lamps. Sarah sat by a small heating unit, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. She couldn't get the image of the caged girl out of her head. Those eyes, not wild, but afraid. Too human to forget. She checked her wrist pad. The Confederacy code forbade interference in local commerce zones. Helping that girl could cost her everything: her post, her freedom. She stared at the dunes where the cages were barely visible, faint shadows under the moon's dot inside the cage. Zex couldn't sleep. The sand was cold under her knees. The traders had gone drunk by the fires, singing songs in a language she didn't know. She pressed her hand against the collar, feeling the faint pulse of its battery. Escape was impossible. She had tried once. The pain that followed had nearly killed her. A sound made her lift her head. Footsteps, soft and cautious. A shadow moved between the cages. A human shape. Sarah knelt by the bars, her face hidden by her hood. "Hey," she whispered. "Can you understand me?" Zex stared back, unsure if this was a trick. Her throat hurt when she tried to speak, but she managed to whisper. "Why? Are you here?" "To help," Sarah said simply. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small food bar. "Here, real food." "No sand," Zex hesitated. No one had ever spoken gently to her since the day of capture. Slowly, she crawled forward, her hands trembling. When Sarah passed the bar through the gap, their fingers brushed. The alien skin was cold, fragile. For a moment, the world was silent. Then Zex took a small bite. Her eyes widened. Flavor, sweetness, warmth. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. Sarah felt her chest tighten. "You're not an animal," she said quietly. "Don't let them make you believe that." From the fires behind them came a shout. One of the traders had noticed movement. "Hey, what are you doing there?" Sarah pulled her hood tighter. "Stay quiet," she whispered to Zex. "I'll come back tomorrow." Then she slipped into the dark, leaving the girl holding the half-eaten food bar like a miracle. Zex looked toward the human camp, the lights faint in the distance. For the first time in years, her heart beat not from fear, but from hope. As the wind rose again, scattering sand across the cages, she pressed her forehead to the cold bars and whispered the only word she still remembered from her mother's tongue, "Thank you," and far across the dunes, Sarah stood at the edge of the camp, staring back at the cages under the twin moons. She knew she had just broken protocol, but something deep inside her whispered that rules meant nothing if humanity forgot how to be human. The twin suns had barely risen over the copper dunes when the trader camp came alive again. Laughter, shouting, the clinking of metal plates. Zex was awake long before them, sitting quietly in her cage. Her stomach still remembered the taste of that strange human food. Her fingers still tingled from that small touch, the first gentle contact in years. From the dunes, she could see the human camp. Tiny silver domes and antennas glittered in the heat haze. She didn't know the woman's name, but she remembered her face. That calm, kind look, it didn't belong to this cruel place. Sarah Chun hadn't slept much either. She had paced the camp all night, replaying what she had seen, the girl's hollow eyes, the way she had whispered "thank you." The images wouldn't leave her mind. She told herself she shouldn't interfere, that it wasn't her mission. But the more she repeated that, the emptier it sounded. During breakfast, her teammate Lieutenant Minjun Park noticed her silence. "You okay?" he asked, chewing on a protein pack. Sarah glanced at him. "You ever see something you can't unsee?" He raised an eyebrow. "On Zarkin 5? Every hour. I mean something that makes you question who the monsters really are." Minjun sighed. "Let me guess. The cages?" She nodded slowly. "They're not animals, Min. One of them spoke to me." "That's none of our business," he said firmly. "Command said this region isn't under Confederacy jurisdiction. You start breaking those lines, and we all end up in a tribunal." Sarah stared at the horizon. Maybe some lines need to be crossed. By noon, the traders had begun loading hover crates with ore and supplies. The air shimmered with heat. 2 armored guards patrolled near the cages, joking about which beast would fetch the best price in the next market. That was when Zex heard it, a soft hum, low and rhythmic, beneath the usual noise. She looked up. Beyond the ridge, a single human transport vehicle approached, kicking up sand behind it. It stopped near the cages. Sarah stepped out, wearing her utility vest and helmet. "Routine inspection," she said, her voice steady. The guards exchanged looks. "Inspection? For what?" "Radiation leaks. The Confederacy's orders." "You want a fine for violating export codes?" They hesitated. Humans loved paperwork, and no one wanted to deal with official fines. Grumbling, they backed away to let her pass. Sarah walked slowly between the cages, scanning with her wristpad to maintain the act. Her eyes met Zex's through the bars. Zex's pulse quickened. Sarah's lips moved silently. "Stay calm." With her back turned to the guards, Sarah slid a small device from her belt, a signal scrambler. She placed it quietly against the lock of Zex's cage. A faint beep, then silence. The red light on the collar flickered once and went dark. Sarah glanced around. "You'll have to run when I say so," she whispered. "Run where?" Zex whispered back, trembling. "Anywhere but here." Before Sarah could trigger the release, a shout rang out. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the guards had noticed the blinking scrambler. He raised his rifle. Sarah spun around, firing her stun pistol. The blast hit his chest, sending him sprawling into the sand. The other guard yelled into his comms. The camp exploded into chaos. Traders grabbed weapons, shouting orders. The other cages rattled as terrified captives screamed. Sarah hit the unlock command. Zex's cage door burst open. Go. Sarah shouted. Zex froze for half a second, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Then instinct took over. She crawled out, stumbled, and started running toward the dunes. The sun burned her back, but the air tasted like freedom. Sarah fired again, covering her path. A shot grazed her shoulder. She ducked behind a supply crate, gritting her teeth. Min Jun. Code red. I need extraction. She yelled into her comm. Static, then his voice crackled through. What did you do, Sarah? Just send the rover and bring Co Yeon with med gear. Zex reached the ridge, turning once to see the chaos below. Sarah was still there, shooting, shielding her. A surge of fear struck her. The human was going to die because of her dot without thinking. She ran back down. Sarah was reloading when she saw the small figure sprinting toward her. What are you doing? She shouted. X grabbed a fallen guard's baton and swung it at another who came up behind. Sarah. The man dropped instantly. Not leaving you. Zex gasped. Sarah blinked, then laughed breathlessly. You really don't know how rescues work, do you? Moments later, a roar filled the air. Min Jun's rover blasted over the dunes, spraying sand everywhere. The hatch opened, and Dr. Co Yeon Jung leaned out. Get in. Sarah pushed Zex ahead and jumped after her. The rover sped away as plasma bolts scorched the sand around them. Behind them, the camp burned. One of the hover crates had exploded, setting off a chain reaction. Inside the rover, Zex huddled against the wall, clutching the fabric of her robe. Sarah's arm was bleeding, but she smiled faintly. Told you I'd come back, she said. Zex looked at her, confused but awed. Why? The twin suns had barely risen over the copper dunes when the trader camp came alive again. Laughter, shouting, the clinking of metal plates. Zex was awake long before them, sitting quietly in her cage. Her stomach still remembered the taste of that strange human food. Her fingers still tingled from that small touch, the first gentle contact in years. From the dunes, she could see the human camp. Tiny silver domes and antennas glittered in the heat haze. She didn't know the woman's name, but she remembered her face. That calm, kind look. It didn't belong to this cruel place. Sarah Chun hadn't slept much either. She had paced the camp all night, replaying what she had seen, the girl's hollow eyes, the way she had whispered thank you. The images wouldn't leave her mind. She told herself she shouldn't interfere, that it wasn't her mission. But the more she repeated that, the emptier it sounded. During breakfast, her teammate Lieutenant Min Jun Park noticed her silence. You okay? He asked, chewing on a protein pack. Sarah glanced at him. You ever see something you can't unsee? He raised an eyebrow. On Zarkin 5? Every hour. I mean something that makes you question who the monsters really are. Min Jun sighed. Let me guess. The cages? She nodded slowly. They're not animals, Min. One of them spoke to me. That's none of our business, he said firmly. Command said this region isn't under Confederacy jurisdiction. You start breaking those lines, and we all end up in a tribunal. Sarah stared at the horizon. Maybe some lines need to be crossed. By noon, the traders had begun loading hover crates with ore and supplies. The air shimmered with heat. 2 armored guards patrolled near the cages, joking about which beast would fetch the best price in the next market. That was when Zex heard it, a soft hum, low and rhythmic, beneath the usual noise. She looked up. Beyond the ridge, a single human transport vehicle approached, kicking up sand behind it. It stopped near the cages. Sarah stepped out, wearing her utility vest and helmet. "Routine inspection," she said, her voice steady. The guards exchanged looks. "Inspection? For what?" "Radiation leaks. The Confederacy's orders. You want a fine for violating export codes?" They hesitated. Humans loved paperwork, and no one wanted to deal with official fines. Grumbling, they backed away to let her pass. Sarah walked slowly between the cages, scanning with her wrist pad to maintain the act. Her eyes met Zex's through the bars. Zex's pulse quickened. Sarah's lips moved silently. "Stay calm." With her back turned to the guards, Sarah slid a small device from her belt, a signal scrambler. She placed it quietly against the lock of Zex's cage. A faint beep, then silence. The red light on the collar flickered once and went dark. Sarah glanced around. "You'll have to run when I say so," she whispered. "Run where?" Zex whispered back, trembling. "Anywhere but here." Before Sarah could trigger the release, a shout rang out. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the guards had noticed the blinking scrambler. He raised his rifle. Sarah spun around, firing her stun pistol. The blast hit his chest, sending him sprawling into the sand. The other guard yelled into his comms. The camp exploded into chaos. Traders grabbed weapons, shouting orders. The other cages rattled as terrified captives screamed. Sarah hit the unlock command. Zex's cage door burst open. "Go." Sarah shouted. Zex froze for half a second, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Then instinct took over. She crawled out, stumbled, and started running toward the dunes. The sun burned her back, but the air tasted like freedom. Sarah fired again, covering her path. A shot grazed her shoulder. She ducked behind a supply crate, gritting her teeth. "Min June." Code red, "I need extraction." She yelled into her comm. Static, and his voice crackled through. "What did you do, Sarah?" "Just send the rover and bring Seo Yan with med gear." Zex reached the ridge, turning once to see the chaos below. Sarah was still there, shooting, shielding her. A surge of fear struck her. The human was going to die because of her dot without thinking. She ran back down. Sarah was reloading when she saw the small figure sprinting toward her. "What are you doing?" She shouted. "Ce." X grabbed a fallen guard's baton and swung it at another who came up behind. "Sarah." The man dropped instantly. "Not leaving you." Zex gasped. Sarah blinked, then laughed breathlessly. "You really don't know how rescues work, do you?" Moments later, a roar filled the air. Min Jun's rover blasted over the dunes, spraying sand everywhere. The hatch opened, and Dr. Seo Young leaned out. "Get in." Sarah pushed Zex ahead and jumped after her. The rover sped away as plasma bolts scorched the sand around them. Behind them, the camp burned. One of the hover crates had exploded, setting off a chain reaction. Inside the rover, Zex huddled against the wall, clutching the fabric of her robe. Sarah's arm was bleeding, but she smiled faintly. "Told you I'd come back," she said. Zex looked at her, confused but awed. "Why?" "Because no one deserves a cage," Sarah said softly. "Not on my watch." As the rover vanished into the storm of dust, the desert swallowed the cries of the traders. The sky burned orange above the dunes, and for the first time, Zex felt something she had forgotten long ago, the dizzying, terrifying warmth of hope not far ahead. At the Terran outpost, alarms began to sound. Sarah knew there would be consequences, maybe court-martial, maybe worse. But when she looked at the trembling girl beside her, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some things were worth breaking orders for. The rover roared through the desert night, its engines whining under strain. The stars above Zaken 5 shimmered through thin clouds of dust. Inside, Sarah sat pressed against the cold metal wall, one hand over her bleeding shoulder, the other gripping the seat rail as the vehicle bounced over dunes. Zex sat opposite her, still shaking, her eyes darting at every sound. Dr. Seo-Yeon Young knelt beside Sarah, spraying a coagulant over the wound. "You've completely lost your mind," she muttered, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "You attacked a local camp, assaulted traders, and freed their merchandise?" "She wasn't merchandise," Sarah replied, her tone flat. "She's a person." Min-Jun glanced back from the driver's seat. "Command's going to court-martial us all if they find out. You realize that, right?" Sarah leaned her head back against the metal. "Then I'll take the blame." Zex flinched when Seo-Yeon tried to approach her with a med scanner. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, lowering her voice. "She's a doctor. She won't hurt you." Slowly, Zex allowed Seo-Yeon to check her vitals. The scanner beeped, showing readings that made the doctor's eyebrows rise. Malnourished, dehydration severe, and her neural collar caused deep tissue scarring. If we hadn't gotten her out now, she wouldn't have lasted a week. Zex didn't understand every word, but she recognized the tone concern. No one had ever spoken that way around her before Dot, as they neared the Terran outpost. The night wind carried a low hum, the power field of the base's perimeter. Min-Jun slowed the rover. "We'll have to keep her hidden. The patrol drones will flag her as an unregistered alien." "I know a place," Sarah said. "Maintenance Bay 3. It's off the grid while we fix the tower." They slipped through the east gate just as dawn began to brighten the horizon. Inside the base, Sarah led them down a narrow corridor lined with repair drones and stacked crates. The bay was quiet, lit only by a few flickering lamps. Zex sat on a folded tarp while Seo-Jun brought her water and nutrient paste. She sipped carefully, unsure how to eat in front of humans. Sarah crouched nearby. "You're safe here," she said gently. "No one's going to hurt you." Zex's voice trembled. "They'll come?" "The traders. They always come back." "Not this time," Sarah replied. "We'll protect you." Zex looked at her, confused. "Why?" Sarah paused. She didn't have a perfect answer. Because someone should have done it sooner. Outside the walls, however, the traders were not gone. Back at the burned camp, a tall, red-skinned Zarkonian with a jagged scar across his chin stood among the wreckage. His name was Zircon, commander of the slave convoy and one of the sector's most feared hunters. He knelt beside a half-buried collar, lifting it with two clawed fingers. "Human weapon fire," he growled. "Terran make." A terrified guard nodded. "The woman, the one from the base?" "She freed one of them." Zircon's eyes narrowed. "Then the Confederacy has broken their own pact." He rose, turning toward the horizon where the outpost lights faintly glowed. "Find her. Bring the girl back alive. The buyer on Vraxis doesn't care how many humans die in the process." Back in Maintenance Bay 3, Sarah finished patching her shoulder when Min-Jun came in, pale-faced. "Command knows something's off," he said quietly. "They got a transmission from the Zarkonians, claiming we attacked them. They're demanding an investigation." Seo-Yeon frowned. "They'll scan the base soon. If they find her here, I'll move her," Sarah said firmly. "There's an old relay bunker outside the perimeter. No sensors, no drones." Min-Jun rubbed his temples. "You can't just keep hiding her. This isn't a movie, Sarah. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone," she said softly. "Just one." That night, the wind howled over the desert again. Sarah led Zex through the maintenance tunnels, a small lamp guiding their way. The alien girl's bare feet patted softly on the metal floor. She held onto Sarah's sleeve like a frightened child. Dot at the end of the tunnel. They reached the old relay bunker, a small, dusty shelter, half buried under sand. Inside were old crates, a cracked water tank, and a single power lamp. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Zex looked around, her wide eyes reflecting the light. "It's quiet," she whispered. "Quiet is good," Sarah said. She laid out a blanket and handed Zex a small tablet with holo images, oceans, forests, blue skies. "That's Earth," she explained. "My home." Zex touched the image, tracing the waves with her finger. "Your world has water." "Everywhere?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Yeah, you'd like it." Zex hesitated, then said softly, "Do humans keep cages too?" Sarah froze. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not everyone agrees with it. Some of us fight to tear them down." Zex lowered her gaze. "Then, you are one of the good ones." Sarah reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Maybe, but you're the brave one, Zex. You survived." Unseen by them, far above the dunes, a small drone hovered, its red eye blinking. It zoomed in, recording the two figures in the bunker before flying back toward the dark horizon, toward Zircon's fleet. Inside the bunker, Sarah finally exhaled, believing they were safe for now. Zex curled up under the blanket, whispering words in her own language, a lullaby she barely remembered, and as the storm outside howled louder, a shadow began to fall over Zaken 5, the shadow of vengeance, because Zircon was coming, and this time he was bringing an army. The next day dawned in silence, but it was the kind of silence that came before storms. The twin suns burned over the dunes of Zaken 5, turning the air into shimmering waves of heat. From the lookout tower at the Terran outpost, Lieutenant Minjun Park watched the horizon with a tight jaw. Something didn't feel right, Dot. He tapped his comb. "Base control, this is Park. Are our long-range scanners working?" "I'm getting intermittent readings." "Affirmative," came the reply. "But there's static interference from the northern dunes. Could be a sandstorm." Minjun frowned. "Or something hiding behind one." Inside the old relay bunker, Sarah Chun was wrapping Zex's hands in light bandages. The girl's palms were raw from the collar burns and her escape. She sat quietly, watching Sarah's every movement with curious eyes. "You always help people you don't know?" Zex asked softly. Sarah smiled. "Pretty much. Old habit, where I'm from," Zex said. "Help has a price." "Then maybe it's time to change that," Sarah replied. Before Zex could answer, a tremor shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. Sarah froze, listening. Another tremor followed, then a distant rumble, like thunder but heavier. She grabbed her comb. "Minjun, what's happening up there?" Static, then his voice came through, urgent. "Multiple heat signatures. Dropships Zarkonian make. They're landing outside the perimeter." Sarah's blood ran cold. "He found us." "Who found us?" Zex whispered, eyes wide. "Zircon," Sarah said. "And he's not here to talk." At the base, alarms blared. Soldiers scrambled to defense positions, power shields rising along the perimeter. Minjun sprinted toward the command deck. "Get the heavy turrets online." He shouted. Dot outside the bunker. The desert roared to life. 3 Zarkonian dropships slammed into the sand, hissing as ramps lowered. Dozens of armored figures emerged, red-skinned warriors carrying plasma rifles, their eyes glowing under black helmets. In front of them strode Zircon, towering, his cloak whipping in the wind. "Find the girl," he ordered. "Bring me the human who stole her." Sarah looked around the bunker. There was nowhere to run. "Zex, listen to me," she said quickly. "You stay low. When I say run, head south toward the cliffs. Minjun will cover you." Zex clutched the blanket. "No, I won't leave you." Sarah knelt and gripped her shoulders. You have to. You're the reason this fight matters. You're proof that kindness still means something. Zex's voice trembled. I'm not strong. Yes, you are, Sarah said firmly. You survived them. Now you show them you're free. A deafening boom shook the bunker, the first plasma shell hitting the perimeter shield. Sarah pulled her pistol and earpiece. Min-June, I'm bringing her in. Open South Gate Delta in 5. Negative. Min-June shouted over comms. They'll see you. Stay put. Not an option. She grabbed Zex's hand, pulling her toward the exit tunnel. Outside, the sky glowed orange from plasma fire. The Terran outpost fought back, railguns thundering, missiles streaking across the dunes. But the Tsar, Conian forces were relentless. They sprinted over the sand as explosions lit the horizon. Zex stumbled once, and Sarah caught her arm. Keep going. She yelled. Suddenly, a shadow dropped in front of them. A Zarkonian soldier, armor gleaming. He raised his weapon. Sarah fired first, the blast slamming him backward. Don't stop. They reached the edge of the cliffs just as a gunship swooped low. The heat from its thrusters seared the air. Zex gasped. They'll kill us. Sarah grabbed her comb. Min-June now. From the base, a rail turret rotated and fired a single shot. The projectile tore through the gunship's wing, sending it spinning into the dunes in a burst of flame. The shock wave knocked them both to the ground. Sand rained down around them. When Sarah looked up, she saw Zircon standing 100 meters away, staring at her through the smoke. His armor gleamed with gold insignia, his clawed hands crackling with energy. So, he growled, "This is the human who thinks she can steal from me." Sarah rose slowly, breathing hard. "You don't own her." Zircon's lip curled. "Everything that breathes under these suns belongs to us." "Not anymore," Sarah said. He laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed across the dunes. "You think one fragile Terran can stand against me?" Sarah raised her pistol. "I don't need to stand against you. I just need to keep her free." Zircon lunged. She fired once, twice, 3 times. The shots hit his armor, barely slowing him. He swung his blade, slicing across her vest, sparks flying. She fell backward, rolling across the sand. Zex screamed, running forward despite Sarah's orders. She grabbed a loose plasma canister from a wrecked drone and hurled it at Zircon's feet. The explosion sent him stumbling back. Roaring. Sarah dragged herself up, coughing. "Nice throw." Zex's hands shook. "We have to go." But the fight wasn't over. More dropships descended in the distance. The Confederacy base blared evacuation sirens. Min-June's voice shouted through the comm. "Sarah, pull back. We're outnumbered." She glanced at Zex, then at the burning horizon. "No, we finish this." Sarah pulled a flare from her belt and shot it into the sky. Seconds later, a Terran gunship broke through the clouds, weapons blazing. Its engines roared as it unleashed a barrage that ripped through Zircon's forces. The shockwave threw everyone to the ground. When the dust cleared, Zircon lay half buried in sand, armor cracked. He glared at Sarah with hatred. "This isn't over, human." "Maybe not," Sarah said, aiming her weapon at him. "But you've lost her." The gunship's ramp opened, and Min-June waved them in. Sarah grabbed Zex's hand, pulling her aboard. As the ship lifted into the burning sky, Zex looked down one last time at the desert where she had once been caged. Tears filled her eyes, not of fear, but of release. Sarah leaned beside her, exhausted but smiling faintly. "You did it," she said. Cex looked at her. "No," she whispered. "We did." Below them, the sands of Zakan 5 glowed red under fire, and the wind carried away the last echoes of chains. For the first time in her life, Zex was not running from something. She was flying toward something new. And Sarah, looking out at the dawn beyond the clouds, made a silent promise. If compassion could start a war, then maybe, just maybe, it could also end one. The morning after the battle, the desert was quiet again. Smoke curled over the dunes like thin black ribbons, and the wreckage of burned ships lay scattered across the horizon. The wind howled softly, carrying the scent of melted metal and dust. From high above, a lone Terran gunship sliced through the pale sky, heading toward orbit. Inside it, silence reigned. ZEX sat by the viewport, wrapped in a gray thermal blanket. Her eyes followed the fading dunes below, the same sands that had once held her prisoner. Now they were shrinking away, growing smaller and smaller until they were only a blur of gold and shadow. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, whispering a word in her own tongue. Free. Behind her, Sarah-Chun leaned against the bulkhead, one arm strapped in a sling. Her uniform was torn, her face smeared with dust, but her expression was calm. Across from her sat Lieutenant Min-Jun Park and Dr. Siu Yung, both exhausted yet strangely quiet. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Min-Jun broke the silence. Command's going to want an explanation. Zircon's raid destroyed half the outpost. They'll call it a breach of protocol. Sarah gave a tired smile. They can call it whatever they want. We saved a life. SEO Yan sighed. You didn't just save one life, Sarah. You exposed an entire slave route. Confederacy Command can't ignore that now. Then maybe that's the point, Sarah said softly. Maybe it's time they stop pretending neutrality means morality. The gunship shuddered as it entered orbit. Outside, the stars bloomed against the black. Zex stared at them, wide-eyed. There, so many, she whispered. Sarah moved closer, sitting beside her. Yeah, she said. Every one of them could be a world. Some peaceful, some cruel. You get to choose where you'll go next. Zex turned to her. You would. Let me choose? Sarah nodded. You're not property. You're a person. You get to decide what comes after. Zex hesitated, then whispered, I don't know how to live free. Sarah smiled gently. That's okay. You'll learn. We'll help you. A soft chime sounded as the ship docked with the Confederacy command vessel Aurora Gate. As the doors opened, white corridor lights flooded the cabin. Officers in crisp uniforms stood waiting. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. Admiral Yung-Hoon Lee, an older man with stern eyes, stepped forward. Sergeant Chun, you're under review for violation of non-interference regulations, unauthorized engagement with a protected trade faction, and destruction of Confederacy property. Sarah straightened. Yes, sir. And he paused, glancing at Zex. ... For saving the life of a sentient being sold illegally under Confederacy radar. The room was silent. Yung-Hoon's expression softened slightly. The Council has reviewed your report. The Zarkonian Trade Authority denies involvement, and evidence of their trafficking network is already spreading across multiple systems. You may have started something larger than you realize, Sergeant. Sarah exhaled slowly. Am I being court-martialed? The Admiral studied her for a long moment, then said, No, you're being reassigned. Reassigned? Min-Jun echoed. To the newly formed Humanitarian Response and Recovery Division, Yung-Hoon said. Command needs officers who understand that rules mean nothing without compassion. He looked at Sarah directly. Consider this a promotion, not a punishment. Sarah blinked in surprise. Thank you, sir. Yung-Hoon nodded, then turned to Zex. And you, young one, what do you wish to do now? Zex looked uncertainly at Sarah, then back at him. I want to help others like me. If they're still in cages, I want them free. Jung-hoon smiled faintly. Then perhaps you've found your purpose too. Later, in the medical bay, Zex sat on a bed while Seo Yeon gently removed the last traces of the collar scar from her neck using a dermal regenerator. It'll fade soon, the doctor said kindly. No more marks. Zex touched the smooth skin. I want to keep a little of it, she said quietly. To remember. Sarah leaned in the doorway, watching her. You won't forget, she said. But you don't have to wear your pain forever. Zex smiled shyly. Will I see you again? Sarah crossed the room and crouched beside her. You'll see me every day if you want. I put in a request. You're officially under Confederacy protection now. That means you'll stay here until you're ready to travel. Zex's eyes filled with tears. You really mean it? Every word. Outside the viewport, the planet Zarkin 5 slowly rotated, its endless dunes glowing orange under the suns. The scars of battle still marked its surface, but high above, life was already beginning again. Weeks passed. The new division's base opened on a neutral world, a place of blue forests and silver rivers. Sarah helped train officers in first contact compassion and humanitarian rescue. Zex joined her as an assistant, learning human language quickly. Every morning, she would stand by the academy's window, watching the sunrise, not behind bars, but beside people who saw her as equal. The other recruits whispered her story, calling her the girl of Zarkin 5, the one who lived like an animal, until a human showed her what kindness could do that one evening. As stars appeared over the forest, Zex walked out to the balcony where Sarah was repairing a beacon. You work too much, Zex teased. Sarah laughed. Old habits die hard. Zex looked up at the stars. Do you think there will always be cages? Sarah was silent for a moment, then said, Maybe. But as long as there's even one person willing to open them, there's hope. Zex smiled softly. Then I'll be one of those people. Sarah looked at her, pride flickering in her tired eyes. You already are. The night wind carried the sound of distant ships departing, missions to other worlds. Other rescues waiting to happen. And somewhere among those stars, the story of a small blue-skinned girl and a stubborn human engineer would become a quiet legend, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of compassion could change the fate of worlds. Months passed since the day Zarkin 5 burned. The war that could have started never came. Instead, reports spread through the frontier systems of the Aurora Gate Accord, a fragile but growing treaty, inspired by one unlikely friendship between a human and an alien slave girl. The universe had begun whispering their story. On the new world of Leora Prime, peace felt different. The air was cool, tinted silver by its twin moons, and the forests glowed faintly at night. Here, Sarah-chan and Zex worked side by side in the newly built humanitarian response headquarters, a place made not of marble or power, but of glass and light. Refugees from half a dozen worlds filled the gardens outside, their laughter blending into the hum of distant shuttles inside. Zex moved carefully between tables, helping distribute ration packs. Her once shaky hands were steady now, her voice calm. When frightened children came through the gates, she was the first to greet them, kneeling to their level. Offering the same soft tone Sarah had once used for her. You remind me of her, a pilot said one afternoon as Zex bandaged a child's wrist. Of who? She asked. The human who saved you. Zex smiled faintly. She didn't save me. She reminded me I was someone worth saving. Across the courtyard, Sarah worked on a communications relay. The Confederacy had authorized a broadcast, a universal message of amnesty for escaped slaves and trafficked beings. The relay would send it across hundreds of systems. She ran her hands over the console, connecting wires, aligning frequency coils. You ready? she asked without turning. Zex stood beside her now, wearing a gray Confederacy vest marked with the emblem of a rising hand. You sure they'll listen? Sarah shrugged. Maybe not all, but someone out there will. Maybe a girl sitting in a cage like you once were. Zex looked at the glowing console. Then let's begin. The relay pulsed to life, sending a soft vibration through the station. A recording light blinked red. Sarah nodded toward the mic. It's your message, Zex, not mine. Zex hesitated, then leaned forward. Her voice was gentle, trembling but strong enough to cross the stars. To anyone who hears this, I was once called a beast. They told me I was less than alive. I ate from the sand. I believed I had no worth. But one human looked at me and didn't see an animal. She saw a person. If you are trapped, know this. You are not what they say. Somewhere, someone still believes in kindness. Hold on to that. Hold on to yourself. Her words hung in the silence. Then Sarah reached over and pressed transmit. The message streaked into space, a wave of light spreading through the void. Weeks later, responses began to arrive. Fragments of broken transmissions, voices from distant worlds. Some were humans offering help. Others were freed aliens who had heard Zex's message and escaped. One message came from a mining colony on Vroxus 3, where workers overthrew their overseers and raised a new banner. We are not beasts. When Zex heard that, she cried. Sarah stood beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. You did that, she said. Zex wiped her tears. No, we did. Time passed. The rescue base grew. More volunteers came, doctors, soldiers, scientists. Sarah became commander of the relief division. Zex became an ambassador, traveling to colonies once afraid of her kind. Wherever she went, she carried the same small pendant Sarah had given her, a simple copper coin engraved with 2 words, Be kind. One evening, as the sun dipped below Liara's horizon, they walked together through the garden. The air shimmered with drifting lights from pollinator drones. Do you ever miss Earth? Zex asked. Sometimes, Sarah admitted. The oceans, the smell of rain. But then I look at this place and think, maybe this is home now. Zex nodded slowly. Home isn't where you're born, she said. It's where someone treats you like you belong. Sarah smiled. You've gotten wise. I learned from the best, Zex teased. They reached the edge of the terrace, where the stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere among them was Zakan 5, still scarred, still dangerous, but no longer silent. I want to go back one day, Zex said quietly. To Zakan? She nodded. Not to fight. To teach. To show the ones still in cages that there's another way. Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked at the young woman standing beside her. No longer the trembling girl she had freed, but someone radiant with quiet strength. Finally, she said, when that day comes, I'll go with you. Zex's eyes glistened. Promise? Promise. Above them, the stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if listening. The galaxy was vast, and cruelty would never fully vanish. But somewhere in its endless night, kindness now had a signal, a name, and a voice that would not be forgotten. And so the story of the girl who lived like an animal, and the human who showed her compassion, became something more than legend. It became a beginning.